Are you ready to take your business to the next level? Every day there are countless books and articles that are published offering the key on how to make your business a success. It's easy to feel overwhelmed trying to keep up and run your business. That's why Deb Creer created the Business Power Hour. Keep up on the latest trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. Let the Business Power Hour do the heavy work for you.
Good morning, good morning. I am Deb Creer, and I am passionate about giving professionals the tools that they need to make themselves and their businesses as successful as possible. And today, we're going to be talking about how to work with the biggest entity in the world. And isn't that very intriguing? I think this is just very cool. And I actually have some experience in this. So this is going to be great fun. So please join me in welcoming Ron Imbach to our program today. Welcome, Ron. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
You know, can't be doing any better.
Well, we talked about a few minutes just before we started. It was your birthday last week. So, Hey, this is wonderful. It's post-birthday week, but you can still kind of let it roll over a little bit into this week, right?
It is, as long as I don't have to keep adding years.
Oh, no.
We can celebrate for a month at least. Well, let me tell people a little bit about you, and then we will dive into this. So Ron Imbach is the president of the Center for Business Innovation and the executive director of the International Association of U.S. Government Contractors. See, there's that big entity. He and his partner, Chip Ellis, lead a talented team that provides coaching, consulting, and training to small businesses who want to thrive with federal contracts. Ron has spent the past 30 plus years assisting small businesses, high net worth individuals, nonprofits, and large companies. With an undergraduate degree in accounting and economics and an MBA in marketing and public policy, Ron is very comfortable with the numbers, but thrives the most in relationship building, including assisting his clients now in building relationships with federal government decision makers. So again, Ron, welcome.
Oh, thank you. Wow, that was nice. I appreciate that.
It's always so much fun when we hear our own bios, right? Well,
Indeed.
One of the things that I always like to know from my guests is how did they get to where they are today? So tell us a little bit about how you discovered that this is your passion in life.
In all honesty, I started, probably, it's been about 11 years ago that I started in doing more consulting, opened my own business, that kind of thing. And I was a business coach for the last, I even called myself business coach when it became popular to call yourself a business coach versus a consultant, right? Became a business coach 2015, so it's been about 7 years ago now. And I just always found that, in spite of having a lot of experience, doing a lot of marketing, I could throw a nice resume and a profile in front of folks, that distinguishing yourself in a sea of a lot of business coaches was a tough thing to do.
Right.
So one of the things that I had worked with my partner, Chip, I've known him about 4 years or so. Okay. And I knew that he worked with and I just found it fascinating, this, the no bid, because I had always heard, like most people have, about bid,
that you have to do these.
Right? And it's complicated, it takes a long time, it's expensive, all these other things. You got to work with consultants. And when I learned about this no bid, we did a couple of projects over the last few years or so. And then he and I were chatting about 2.5 years ago. And we said, we should go, because we were always like, I would call him, he would call me, and we'd pick each other's brains. What are you doing now? Okay, what types of things are working? And we both kind of came to this joint conclusion. Why don't we start a company together? Okay, because as a coach, it gives me a way to distinguish my services. And for him, he can throw in more of a coaching aspect with what he's doing with government contracts. So we both kind of got, as the couple of years have gone through, we've added a number of things to our services. We think it's much better right now for helping small businesses get contracts and get them quicker. All right. So that's been really exciting to see businesses grow like that. So that's why I really enjoy it. I mean, I really do. I'm kind of an entrepreneur at heart, kind of independent. I like to do those kinds of things, and helping people of the same kind of mindset
Mhm.
try to do the same thing, get their businesses going, get working with government contracts, start generating more revenue, growing their business, becoming more profitable. That makes me feel good.
Mhm.
I can sleep well at night like that. So that's why I'm doing it.
I love it. I love it. Well, and as we mentioned, the U.S. federal government is the biggest entity in the world to work with. Yeah, and that includes all the other nations. The U.S. federal government is just huge. And I long ago, pre-internet almost. I mean, we FTP'd stuff. I worked for two different companies that we were entirely government contractors. One was a classified organization, and then the other was a company where we designed software for NASA and for the Navy. And it was one of my responsibilities was invoicing, was preparing things. And I remember always thinking, this is so hard. Even when we knew the people, knew exactly what we were even doing follow-up contracts. I mean, right? And and then when I started my own business, I would bid on contracts because I knew how to do that. And I also bid on state contracts. And again, it was like, oh my God, this is so hard. So what piqued my interest were the words no bid. So tell us how this works.
Well, the federal government, federal decision makers,
Mhm.
and when I say decision makers, the people that are going to buy things from our clients, from
Mhm.
anyone, are called buyers, and they're called end users.
Right.
Okay. Buyers are going to typically be people like contract officers. It won't just, their title on a card won't be I am a buyer. It
Right.
will be I'm a contract officer. You might see for an end user, that's who we call the people in the agencies. They might be a program director of some kind. They may be a facilities manager, something like that. You could even hear a buyer called a procurement officer.
Right. That's
So
what I'm used to.
yeah, that's what you're used to. So those types of people don't have to put all their contracts out to bid, which is what a lot of people think. They have a choice.
Yeah, to
Okay?
make it a fair process, it goes out for bid, and it's like a 50-year process.
And the reason they don't promote no bid a lot, because if everyone knew about no bid, you'd have everyone wanting to get every contract.
Right.
And quite frankly, it would just be a bidding war then. So they just, okay, everything will be bid.
Right.
Now, the tricky part about no bid contracts is that you have to build a relationship.
Right.
And a lot of people are good at that. Kind of like when you and I were talking before we got on the air about, you said you had a couple of buyers, procurement officers
Right.
that you build a relationship with.
Oh yeah, for years.
If you build a good relationship with 2 to 3 buyers and end users, you don't have to have a relationship with 30 different people. You literally can have a relationship with 2 to 3 buyers. They can give you all the contracts that you can really handle. If you build a stronger, because they want to work with small business. I'm going to give you a little stat to kind of, when I say they want to work with small businesses, I hear a lot of people every day, they'll tell me, oh, come on, all those contracts go to the Lockheed Martins
Right.
and those guys. Okay. Every contract with the federal government, every one under $150,000. And I mean, I'm sure most of your listeners, if you tell them, how would you like to get every contract you could even handle under $150,000? Would that help your business?
We'll raise our hands.
Yeah. I'd have my hand up as well if I was doing it. Okay. We don't do that ourselves. We don't compete with our clients. But when I tell clients like that, they say, of course. So everyone is set aside for small businesses. Then the second question I go, well, that's all good and well, Ron, but how many of those are there?
Right.
Nearly 92% of all contracts with the federal government are 150,000 or less.
Wow.
Nearly 97. Now, the problem is, though, and again, all of those contracts under 150,000 are set aside for small businesses. The majority of them are no bid contracts. Okay, a lot of the smaller ones are no bid because they're not. I mean, if Boeing is going to try and get a 20, 50, $100 million contract,
that should be a complicated process.
And it should be complicated for good reason. However, if the Department of Commerce or Homeland Security or a military base needs to have their grass cut. That's not that complicated.
Right.
I mean, nothing against my friends. I don't know how to, all the things they do with the lawn and make it look good and all that. Look at my lawn outside this winter. It doesn't look that great. So my point is there's a lot involved in those bigger contracts, but for the contracts that we need to have a painting job done. We need to have cleaning done in the building. We need to have landscaping done, the grass mowed.
Right.
We need to have just basic computers, those kinds of things. All of those contracts are perfect for no bids. Perfect for no bid contracts.
Right.
And this will even amaze you more, because this was my first. You mentioned your first experience with government contracting. My first experience with government contracting was way back when, if you remember, a company named Arthur Anderson and Company.
Right. That accounting firm.
Yeah, the ones that kind of got in a little bit of trouble here a while back. Well, when they were still on top of the heap, I worked with them as a tax accountant. Later on, I worked for Anderson Consulting, which was part of Arthur Anderson.
Right.
It broke off, then they became Accenture more recently. Anyway, Anderson Consulting had a big government contract back in the early 90s. Okay, when I started, I'm an old guy. So back in the early 90s. And I wondered why I was just working with a lot of small business consultants that had their own businesses. And I knew they had a contract with GSA for maybe $100 million, $50 million. And I thought, why don't they just do it themselves? And I never really got a great answer to that. Now I know the answer to that. When those big companies get those big contracts, they have to give a portion of that contract, nearly a third of it, to small companies. So not only are all the contracts of 150,000 or less set aside for small businesses, then when the big guys, whether it's Microsoft or one of the big consulting firms or whomever the case may be, get a huge contract, then they've got to subcontract out, bring on subcontractors for small businesses for nearly a third of the business.
Wow.
So whenever anyone says, no, government contract, federal government contracting is just for big businesses, it's really the exact opposite.
Right.
Now, I'll give you one more statistic. Last year, I'll probably give you a few more while we're talking.
Of course.
Right now. But last year, the federal government spent over $600 billion with companies outside the federal government. Okay, so not internally with their own people. Over $600 billion. Of that over $600 billion, nearly 80% set aside for small businesses.
Wow.
That's nearly a half. I love using big numbers. Okay. That's nearly $500 billion set aside for small businesses. Now, I'm going to tell you a sad side of that now, though. Okay. So all that money set aside, and you're like, a lot of your viewers might be saying, well, why are you on here?
Right.
If people are already getting, the sad news is that only 6.7% of the contracts that were set aside for small businesses actually go to small businesses.
Well, now how's that work?
And one more, and then I answer that. 25% of the revenue.
Okay.
So that means 75% of the revenue, 93% of the contracts are being left on the table by small businesses.
Right.
And now, what was that question you just said?
Yeah. So obviously the work's still getting done. So how is that working?
The problem is with small businesses, because I think you could probably do a poll of your audience, and you could ask them about federal contracts and say, "What have you ever done any work with the government?" The vast majority will say no.
Right.
The ones who do say yes, if you ask one more question, were you working as a subcontractor or were you working as a primary contractor? They'll tell you.
Most are going to say a sub, probably.
A subcontractor, exactly. So unfortunately, the thing about it can be wonderful. Okay. You can work for a big company and they can keep you on, but you're a little bit reliant on the big company.
Right.
The big company finds another subcontractor, another small business that they would rather work with on a contract. They can always give them the contract. So our program, and where the disconnect is that most businesses cannot be primary contractors. You want to position yourself and be ready to be a primary contractor. And all that basically means is you get the registrations. And the good part is registering to do business with the federal government. You and your viewers may have heard of SAM.
Right.
Okay. That's what you have to register. And then you get something called, some people know this, some people don't, called a cage code number. That's how, just like if you have an EIN number for a business.
It's it tells what category you're in, basically.
That's your ID. Okay. That's who you are. That's who they know who you are. And then they have these things called NAICS code. Okay. NAICS is the acronym for the type of business that you do. So they identify you by your cage code, that's your company, and then your NAICS code, okay, for the type of work that you do, what industry you're in. Unfortunately, for small businesses, there have been so many, and we call them we do these weekly, we do them, bi-weekly, we do them 2 or 3 times a week, sometimes master classes for 2 hours on government contracting and what you need to know, what the opportunity is. Okay. And the amazing thing is that there is no cost, because, most things, if you're getting into a new business, right, there's often a barrier. There's often a barrier to business, whether that's financial, time, expertise, whatever the case may be. With the federal government, they don't have that. They do not have a time barrier. Okay. They do not have a time barrier. So they do not have a cost barrier. Now, I'm not saying it's easy to do. Okay. Because we do that work and we've been doing it for over 14 years as a company. So it's not easy to do it. It has to be perfect, but it's free to register with SAM and with SBA to do business. And at some point, fairly soon, SBA is going to be handling just about all those registrations, even for special, what they call set asides, which we can talk about as well if you want. But essentially, so bottom line it, most businesses have heard so many myths about there's too much paperwork. Only the big guys get that. You have to have 5 or 10 years of experience. You don't get paid on time, yada, yada, yada. All these different kinds of things that they've just said, I don't even want to deal with.
Right.
But then there's also a group that says, well, I've heard there's a lot of money, so I'm going to try it. But they come in trying to bid. And unfortunately, the federal government, if you don't have experience and you're trying to bid, the chances of you getting that contract accepted and getting paid is very slim.
Right.
Why? If you don't have experience and you're bidding on something, there's a very good chance there are 5, 10, 20 different businesses that do have experience. So consequently, let's say if I'm Mr. Buyer for the government, and if I'm going to buy, computer equipment, IT, that's the thing that the government buys more than anything, IT services of all types. So I'm going to buy computers. Now I've got one person that I like the name of the company. The guy seemed like a good guy on the phone. He sent in his bid on really cool yellow paper that I like. It's my favorite color. And there are another 10 or 15 people that have great experience and have been working with the government. So Mr. Buyer picks his guy with the yellow paper to get the bid. Okay. Well, if that person, and again, has no experience, doesn't do a good job, which unfortunately
it happens.
It happens. If they don't do, and let's say it's a decent sized contract, or let's say it happens more than one time, Mr. Buyer's supervisor is going to say, what are you doing?
Right.
Why are you giving these bids and giving these contracts to people with no experience when you've got a whole group of people with experience that we know we could work with? That's why the buyer goes, I'm not going to do a lot of that. Now, the no bid process is a little bit different because often they're not as complicated, like we talked about, might just be for cleaning or a smaller dollar amount, that kind of thing. And they are actually specifically for small businesses. So, and buyers are judged on 2 different criteria as a buyer. They're judged on how many small businesses. Remember, I said all those contracts are set aside for small businesses. Okay, so they get a check mark for that, but they also get a check mark. Obviously, did they do a good job? So Mr. Buyer can get a check mark for a small business if it's a no bid contract. Then if that business does a bad job, he doesn't get a check mark for that.
He gets dinged.
He gets dinged. However, it's not as bad as getting dinged on the bid because you had other people you could have chosen. Okay. So consequently, in that situation, Mr. Buyer just says, you don't get any more contracts. I'm going to go on to another small business.
Right.
Okay. And eventually you're going to find a small business. I would even say eventually you might miss one, and then you get 2, 3, or 4 that are good. Okay. And then those people, that's why they want to give, when I say all the contracts you can handle, that's one of our catchphrases. That's why we use it. Because once you've established yourself as a dependable, okay, reliable supplier, vendor for the federal government, you become a verified vendor. They want to work with you. Because go back to those stats I gave you, 75% of the revenue that was set aside for small businesses is not going to them.
Right.
93% of the contracts are not going to them. They want small businesses to have those contracts. So if you show up with what we call show up properly, the federal government calls it your procurement ready. Okay. You can be a primary contractor. You show up properly, you do a good job. Yeah, and when I say do a good job within budget,
on time, all of those things.
On time, everything you need to do, you do those things, they'll keep on giving you contracts. Once you get to 300,000 with the federal government, you have federal experience. They're going to continue to give you no bids, but then actually you can start bidding if you want.
Right.
Because
and they share your name with other procurement, buyer, whatever we're calling them, people.
That's one of the reasons why if you do a bad job on a contract, we tell our clients, don't do it. If you do a bad job on a contract, don't plan on getting more contracts because they talk. The buyers, there are a lot of buyers, but the word gets out there. And in fact, it's not even just word of mouth. It's, you're going to get rated. If you get a low rating below, you usually want to get 7, 8 or above on your contracts. If you get a rating of a 2, 3, or 4, forget getting any other contracts. Just not going to do it.
Right.
So you got to do a good job.
And before the program started, we were talking about the fact that federal contracts are everywhere in the United States. I mean, clearly, and I wouldn't even say that the majority are in DC, especially from like a monetary perspective, things like that. I'm just down the street from Lockheed Martin. And, and I mean, they build the big C-130s. So those are big contracts. Not only are they big planes, they're big contracts. So, it's one of those things where it doesn't matter where you are. Now, I was looking, you've got a great website. It's fedprofits.com. And you've got a list on here of the top 40 industries. And many of them are location based. You've talked about janitorial services. You've got on here HVAC, general contractors, plumbing, cable companies, office equipment, all sorts of different supplies, things like that. So clearly, if you're in, say, Wyoming, you're not, trying to get contracts in Minnesota. You're going to be working with the government in your area, but there are others that are on here. I noticed PR and marketing is on this list, so I'm going to have to check this out. But it's worth just sitting down and figuring out what is in my area, that I could conceivably do. I mean, obviously, you're not going to, bid on a janitorial thing if it's even an hour's drive away. I mean, things like that. But there's so many different options here. And that's what I was interesting, was just seeing all of these. And actually, a big part of this, when I'm looking through this list, I assumed that many of these jobs were done by government employees and not contractors.
A lot of them aren't. A lot of them aren't. And to clarify on the point, because you bring up a great point regarding location and the top 40 industries. I'll clarify a couple of things on that. If I'm talking to, and I use this example on a regular basis, even though I don't talk to a lot of folks in the Dakotas, I have nothing against the Dakotas. They're just
there's just not a lot of federal government stuff there.
And there's just not a lot of people and anything else that's just cold, kind of remote. Okay. Again, nothing against my friends in North Dakota. If you're listening, don't send me bad, nasty messages, please. But I'll even tell someone in North or South Dakota, if I'm talking to them, or any other remote area, Wyoming or Montana or Idaho or whatever. It's like, when they say, I don't think there are many contracts here, I'll ask them, okay, do you have a post office nearby?
Right. That's the federal government.
That is the federal government. Do you have a military base? And in fact, they love to put military bases in more remote areas. Okay. So,
there's a reason for that.
there's a reason for that. Exactly. So they want to kind of keep things a little secret. So the point is, no matter where you're at, your first point, there will be government contracts.
Right.
Now, on the second point, and especially initially getting federal contracts, you're going to be doing what they call direct test is the way you're going to be getting your contracts.
Okay.
You do the work directly, whether it's cleaning or whatever the case may be. Okay. Cleaning or landscaping or all the other different things we talk about. And you're going to do that in your area. But once you get experience, once a buyer or an end user starts to see that you do a nice job, that you do a good job on things, then they're going to ask you to help them on things that might even be outside your industry, might even be outside your location, your geographical location. So what you do in that case, you can actually use, and this is a government phrase, but we all kind of understand this. The concept with the government is called teaming. Teaming. So you're going to team with, and you team when you become, now you can also be a subcontractor. We talked about that before. But with teaming, when you have shown up properly and your procurement ready, it means you can be a primary or you're the primary contractor on the contract. So literally, let's say you are a cleaning company in Atlanta, which is where you're, okay? And let's say your buyer buys all the cleaning services for all of the Homeland Security offices throughout the Southeast.
Okay.
And that's entirely possible. Okay. So when Mr. Buyer sees that you've done a good job in Atlanta, Mr. Buyer might say, man, you did such a good job in Atlanta and Augusta. And
what can you do for us in Savannah?
Could you do one in Savannah?
Okay.
Could you do one in Birmingham? Could you do one in Chattanooga? Could you? And let's say you know someone, or you can build a relationship. That's one of the things good about our community with our company. Since we have so many clients, we'll actually have a client in Chattanooga ask a client in Miami, could you do this? My buyer needs something. Okay. So consequently, and that even goes across other industries as well. So let's say again, Mr. Buyer is buying cleaning services in Atlanta, in Birmingham, in Chattanooga, in Savannah. Okay. But in addition to cleaning services, he says, I could really use a good landscaping company in any of those areas. And let's say a landscaping company in one or more of those locations, or you can build a relationship with them. You can team with those people. In addition, I mentioned something before, and I only mention it quickly, but set-asides. Set-asides are preferences given to certain types of companies to get a government contract.
Okay.
For example, a veteran-owned business is a great set-aside to have. An even better set-aside is a service-disabled veteran-owned business.
So the more categories you fall into.
Well, and that just, in fact, they're just two separate categories. They're two separate, but by the same token, an 8A business, which many people have heard of 8A businesses. You may or may not have heard of an 8M business, which is a female-owned business.
Okay.
May or may not know anyone that is has a Native American-owned business. Now, you do have to get certifications for this. At some point, they're all probably going to be done through SBA. Okay, all of them. Right now, like the Veterans Administration, they handle the set-aside for
and that makes sense.
But even that will probably change at some point. That I've been hearing, it's not there yet, but I've been hearing that all that's going to come under the umbrella of SBA at some point. But anyway, hub zone is another big one. Okay, if you've got a business base in a hub zone. So you can even, let's say you don't have any of those set-asides, you can even partner with a business that does have those set-asides. And you can get a contract that you normally couldn't have gotten. And as long as you're small business, and you're doing a certain percentage of the work. Okay, in most cases, but even in some cases, you can do almost none of the work. It might even just more of a supervisor.
Yeah, but there's rules you need to follow.
The hiring, there are rules because it is the federal government. Okay, I always tell folks that they say, "Oh, this sounds easier." I said, "No, it is the federal government. You do have to follow the rules, but if you follow the rules, it's very lucrative. They have a lot of contracts, and as you said at the beginning of the broadcast, it is the biggest possible customer anyone in the world can have. Is the federal government. The government of Canada spends a lot of money on a lot of stuff, not as much as the U.S. does. The government of Germany, the U.K., Mexico, Brazil.
We don't know what Russia does.
We don't know what. Yeah, that's probably not a good topic to get into right now. But anyway,
not right now. Russia and China will just.
We'll just. They're to the side over here. But anywhere in the world, we spend more money than anyone else the federal government does. So that's very, very important.
Well, but that brings up an important point because it's not, I mentioned the fact that, we're the federal government is in all 50 states. They're also in all of these other countries, whether it's an embassy, whether it's a military base, whether it's manufacturing, things like that. So can someone who is say it's a military base in the UK. So could someone who is a citizen of the UK bid on these contracts, or can only US citizens bid on these contracts?
To answer that specific question, yes, if they're a UK resident, a UK business.
Okay.
Not every country in the world, like if you have your business is set up in certain countries in the world, not every country in the world can do business. And again, I won't get into all the different.
Right. It gets complicated.
And some you can kind of like, it's kind of intuitive. It's like, oh yeah, that they, of course they could. So there are some that cannot do business directly with the federal government. Many of them can, even if you're a business in Canada, UK, Mexico, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of those. The other thing is, let's say you're a Mexican citizen, or let's say you're a Canadian or a UK or whatever. You set up a U.S. company. Most of the time, if you set up a U.S. company, and let's say you're doing a little bit of business in the U.S., a little bit of business overseas, all over the place, you can work with the federal government. And what you said about locations, 100% correct. And then think about all the different military bases all over. If you're in Seoul, South Korea, do you think if you got a contract with doing business, whether it's cleaning or landscaping or whatever, with the military in that station in Seoul, South Korea, do you think you could do a little bit of business? You think that'd give you a pretty
probably?
How about in Germany? Oh yeah, absolutely. So the good part is that you're absolutely right. It's not just, do we focus most of our efforts? Because the government spends
most of the contracts are here.
But if you're overseas, and and I've worked with a lot of Canadians on this. If you're a Canadian citizen, just for instance, because a lot of your viewers could be Canadian, could be Australian as well. I've worked with some Australians also. So many of those countries, your company can do business. There's something like automatic, it's almost you're treated like a U.S. company. And I want to say there's 42 different countries, and most of them are the ones you would assume. Some of them you can't. But even those, if you either became a U.S. citizen, which can take a while, but if you opened up a U.S. business, paid your taxes, had an EIN number, the whole 9 yards, most of the time you can do business with the federal government.
Right. And it comes back to building those relationships. So you find, whoever it is in those countries that is responsible for it. You say, hello, how are you? And then, you say, hey, look, tell me more about how to go about this. And they want, like we were saying, they get positives, they get negatives, when they do things. And so they're going to want to help you if you're going about this the right way. And they'll explain, okay, here's the process. Here's, you do, in instance of whatever country, maybe you do have to have a US based company, things like that, but they'll explain these things to you.
Yeah. I like I said, it's not, there are things to learn. And, when you're building, we've talked about a lot about building relationships. You're going to build relationships with buyers as they buy things from you, end users. Something else that with our program, it's because the
Mhm.
rules changed a little last year that we're really, really
Mhm.
excited about. Um, the government's huge into acronyms, of
Mhm.
course, probably as
Right.
big as any other,
I know. It's just I hated working for the government because I never knew, it was like EIEIO XYZ. Okay.
Right. You're Well,
Mhm.
here's one that you may or may not heard of, but you may hear thrown around,
Mhm.
but they're great people to build relationships with. They're called OSDBU
Hmm.
personnel. Okay.
Mhm.
I'm not even going to give you because I've forgotten what one of those
Office
letters
of
is for.
something.
Yeah. But I'm gonna go ahead and ignore that, but I'm gonna tell you
Mhm.
what they actually are, what
Mhm.
everyone knows them as.
Mhm.
They're small business specialists.
Ah.
They're actually people that their job with the
Mhm.
federal government is
Mhm.
to match up qualified businesses,
Mhm.
small businesses, with their buyers and end
Mhm.
users so that they can do work together.
Mhm.
Really cool.
Right.
Really cool. And the cool part about it was up until even last year, we always encouraged relationships with small business
Mhm.
specialists. Unfortunately, they didn't have as much influence. They could be an introducer, but then after that, like the buyer could check off, oh, yeah, I met the person that the small
Mhm.
business specialist said, and then they pick whoever they want to.
Right.
Now, small business specialists have much, much more
Mhm.
influence. So if they come to Mr. Buyer and
Mhm.
say, Mr. Buyer, ABC company,
Mhm.
oh, they're a great small business. I think they could do a great job for you.
Mhm.
You should get that. You should hire them
Mhm.
for this contract. More often than not, and most likely, that buyer is going to say, I'm going to use them.
Mhm. Right.
Now, that's really cool because here's what it's kind of a multiplier effect. And you might say, well, that's all good and well, but that's one small business specialist. They have one buyer.
Mhm.
That's not the case. One small business specialist
Mhm.
works with typically 80 to 85 buyers.
Wow.
80 to 85
Mhm.
buyers. And each buyer represents 20 to 25 end users.
Mhm.
The end users tell the buyers what they want,
Mhm.
especially anything over $100,000, they have to
Mhm.
go through the buyer.
Mhm.
Okay. So I'm just doing the math. So if
That's a
you build,
lot of little balls that they're juggling.
so if you build a great relationship and they really like you
Mhm.
with a small business specialist, suddenly between the buyers and the end users, you've got 1,700
Mhm.
potential people to work with. And what we say a couple of times already, if you've got two, three, four buyers and end users
Mhm.
that are really giving you a lot of contracts,
Right.
you can get all the contracts you can handle.
Mhm.
So do you think the probability of you getting those two, three, or four goes way up
Mhm.
if you get introduced and you're being promoted by one
Right.
small business
Mhm.
specialist to 1,700 people?
Mhm.
So we're really excited. That just changed last year.
Mm.
We've already had two conferences for our clients, or
Wow.
private conferences just for our clients.
Mhm.
We had one last October. We just had one last week.
Mhm.
We're going to start having them for clients probably every month.
Mhm.
And we're going to have different agencies. We're
Mhm.
trying to really get embedded in USDA and kind
Okay.
of drill down real deep because they spend a lot of money on a lot of stuff. It's a big
Mhm.
agency.
Mhm.
Okay. So we have some contacts, but we also have contacts in a number of other
Mhm.
agencies as well. So as our clients get to know those small
Mhm.
business specialists and the buyers and the end users with them, we're going to also introduce them to other agencies as well, so they can start
Mhm.
building. But we're really excited about that. And again, that's been a fairly new, just last
Mm.
year.
Mhm.
They really changed the rules.
Mhm.
I don't know whether it was political or what it was, or encouraging more.
Mhm.
I don't know the answer to that
Mhm.
question, but I do know that they have changed and they have much,
Mhm.
much more influence. So we're
Right.
excited about that.
I love
So
it.
clients.
Well, 20, 30 years ago when I was doing this, they put out publications and you went through. I mean, it's kind of like the want ads, basically, and you look through and you went, oh, I could do this, I could do this, I could do this. I'm assuming that, now it's all online. How the heck does somebody even figure out, is the federal government interested in what I would do?
Well, the good news is the federal government, and here's my phrase I use a lot in the master classes.
Mhm.
Okay. It would take me 30 seconds to tell you what the government doesn't buy.
Ah.
It would take me 30 hours
Mhm.
to tell you what they do buy.
Mhm.
Okay. And I say that because they buy just about everything. Now, on our website, and you referred to our website,
Mhm.
fedprofits.com, we have the top 40 industries.
Mhm.
Now, we know those are really the best industries
Mhm.
that the government buys the most.
Mhm.
But I have people all the time that will just like see our website, come to visit and say, hey, do they buy X?
Mhm.
And I'll go, yes, they buy X.
Mhm.
I'll do a search for them and they'll say, oh, you probably didn't find anything. Nah,
Mhm.
I didn't find much. They only did 1,600 contracts with your
Mhm.
service last year. And these 10 or 15 agencies.
Mhm.
Does that seem like something you'd be interested in learning more about? It's like
Mhm.
they weren't on your top 40 list. If we put the top list of all the industries the government deals with, it would be 3 or 4
Right.
web pages.
Mhm.
Okay. We put the top 40 because we know, especially for no bid contracts.
Mhm.
Okay, the contracts and 150,000 or less.
Mhm.
Although I say that 150,000 or less, but I do want to qualify, just in case you have a bigger
Is that
business.
annually?
That is annually.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's a $150,000 contract. It can be an annual contract.
Mhm.
It can be a 3-year contract, 50 a year.
Okay.
It's just the contract.
The contract's 150.
Yeah,
Okay.
is 150. So, but I say that to you, but I just want to clarify one thing. A lot of people, when they hear no bid for the first time,
Mhm.
before I say what I'm about to say, will say, oh, there's only little contracts. You can't
Mhm.
really get any big contracts. By law, a no bid contract can be as much as, drum roll, $13 million.
Holy cow.
That's not a little contract.
No.
Okay, now, don't plan on getting into this and your first no bid contract. Where's that $13 million
Right,
contract?
right.
I didn't
Ron,
get
you
that.
promised me. You promised me.
You're
Mhm.
not going to get that. I can go ahead and tell you right now, you're not going to
Mhm.
get it. You've got to prove yourself. You're
Mhm.
kind of on I mentioned 300,000 before.
Right. Mhm.
You're kind of on a probation period before you get to 300,000.
Mhm.
Each contract you get, do a good job, do everything
Mhm.
you say you're going to do it on time, do it within budget.
Mhm.
Boom. Okay. If you do that and you get to 300,000, then you're going to start getting a shot at some of those bigger.
Mhm.
You might get a $250,000 contract. You may get a $500,000. You may
Mhm.
get $1 million. You may get 10, 12, 13 million
Mhm.
dollars. It's possible. Just again, keep in mind it's about the relationships, and they've got to really trust you if they're going to give you a $10 million contract
Right.
without bidding on it.
Right.
They got to really trust you.
You know, and for people who just freaked out at that amount, I mean, some of the categories are things like paving, bridge building. I mean, those are big ticket items. You know, and what I do, it's probably not going to hit that. It'd be nice, but yeah. So if you're in an industry where things are typically fairly costly, that's kind of the carryover. But yeah, but that does bring me to my next question of, okay, so say it's, the one person or under 10 employees, do they still have a good shot at some of these contracts? Because I think we still think you have to be pretty big, because we all know that 95% of businesses are considered a small business, which means a lot of those make millions of dollars a year and have lots and lots of employees. So if you're the little guy, do you still have a shot at this?
I will answer that and I'll clarify something real quick and then I'll answer. Okay.
Okay.
The federal government considers a business 50 million or less.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there are different amounts for different industries.
Mm-hmm.
Generally speaking, if you're 50 million or less,
Mm-hmm.
they consider you a small business.
Right. And that's just the weirdest classification in the world, that, that the guy that makes 10,000 a year is in the same category as somebody who makes 50 million. But I realize there's all sorts of different differentiators in there. But
when you think about the biggest companies, though, the variance between 50 million and 10,000
mm-hmm.
is not nearly as great as it is between the 50 million.
Right. Oh yeah.
And
the truly big guys.
$20 billion companies. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So, but now on whether you get it, if you show up properly,
mm-hmm.
I mentioned that before, you're procurement ready.
Mm-hmm.
They will give you what they call a direct test contract.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they call, and I like the phrase. There are other names for no bid contracts. Some people, you may have heard the phrase sole source. Some of your viewers may have
A sole source
sole
contract,
source
which you
contract.
assume means one entity gets it.
Yeah. So a lot of people have heard those phrases. I like the direct test name for those no bid because I look at it as when you're just getting started, you're procurement ready, you've shown up properly, got your registrations in order, they're perfect, which that's one of the things our company, we specialize in that because they're hard to get perfect. Okay. My just a little aside, my partner, to any business that already has their SAM and already has their cage code and we review it for them, if we don't have to make any corrections and it's perfect, he'll give them a $200 bottle of wine.
Cool. And
So
you probably
now
don't give a
I've
lot of
announced-
those away.
What's that?
You probably don't give a lot of bottles of wine away.
In over 14 years, we've given away 3 bottles.
Right.
Having said that, on your podcast, I know you've got a good audience.
Oh yeah, come on, folks, come on. Let's make them buy some wine.
My partner in trouble. You know what I mean? I don't know. So he may have me kick in some $200 bottle of wine. But anyway, if as long as you're showing up properly, you got your registrations, you got your cage code number, they'll give you a chance. You can even be a startup.
Right.
You can be a small business. You can make 100,000 a year in gross revenue. They'll give you a chance. Remember, they're not starting you on, $1 million contract.
Right.
They're not starting you even on 150,000. The first contract you'll probably get, the first no bid contract, will probably be somewhere between $20,000 and $40,000. It won't be that complicated. In fact, it's essentially going to be the proposal that you already do for your commercial clients will be turned into your no bid contract.
Right.
Okay. And that's what you'll be using. So it won't be that complicated. But as you do have success, as you complete the contracts, you can get more and more and more. A very important point here, though, is no one should feel like, and this is sometimes I hear this with state and local, oh, I feel like I've got to take every contract. Because if I don't, I may not get another.
Right.
offer.
I'll get put on the list.
The federal government does not do that. They actually want to work with good small businesses that, quite frankly, are not desperate. If you jump at everything they give you,
then that looks a little suspicious.
It looks, and especially if they may even say, is this company big enough to handle this kind of contract? And they may even give you a shot. And then you blow it. And then we talked about it before. What happens when you blow one of the contracts? You don't get any more contracts. Okay. So you don't have to accept every one. So if one comes up and you're just like, this is a bit too much for me. I don't have a good teaming. We mentioned teaming before. I don't have a good teaming partner. I can't go into this with someone. So I don't have to say yes to that one. Right. The other reason is, let's say you get a contract, you see one and your buyer wants something, you cost it out. They'll usually give you a little bit of time to evaluate. Okay. You evaluate it, you go, I'm not going to make any money on that. I know I want to make usually 15%. I'm only going to make 5% on that. I don't want to do that contract. You can say no to it. That's okay. Now you're going to say no in a very you're not going to tell your federal buyer, oh, what's wrong with you guys? You know what costs are, you're cheap and all. Yeah, of course you're not going to do that. Not a good way to build a relationship, right? So you're going to tell them, I can't really do that right now. It doesn't meet my goals for this and that, but I'd love to assist you with another contract. You want to be their person that they know can help you get things done. Right. Okay. So that's what you want to be.
Right. And size really is the relative thing. If you're, back to the post office example, if it's a post office that has basically 2 rooms, so like the lobby and then the back area, it's pretty small. One person can do the janitorial for it, or a company of 5 can do the HVAC. All of those things. And so I think that's the other thing that we, as we were talking about, we're not, yes, we're talking about, the huge entities, but we're also talking about very small entities. And those small entities can be in large towns too, in cities, it just depends on what they're doing. And so, I want to encourage people to not think I'm not big enough. I think it's more you just need to do the research to find out where you can fit in.
No question about it. There's, like I said, there's a lot of, one of the things we do in our presentation, we have the front page of a no bid list, okay, which is all the contracts, and they're not even contracts yet. They're just like, here's what we need to have done, painting, such and such location. We're going to pay $20,000. Okay. I mean, it's literally can be just a one cent. And the front of the no bid, this is just one page, had about, and I do this all the time in our masterclass, we have 20 or 25 different things they want to have done. And a lot of people will see that and go, Ron, what's the big deal? You get 20 or 25 contracts. That's not that many contracts. What you're talking about, all this different money they spend. That no bid list was from one office of the Coast Guard.
Right.
One office of the Coast Guard. And that no bid list was 3 inches thick, front and back, with 20, 25 contracts of each page.
Right.
We think there are a lot of contracts there.
Right.
Now, most of them were, they went from like $17,000 to $82,000. But as I tell all of our clients, you're a small business. Could you handle another 10 contracts? Would that help your business between $20,000 and $80,000?
Most people are going to raise their hands.
Most people are going to say, they like that. And a good thing about the federal government is not just the amount of contracts you get. Also, most contracts, like a lot of the ones we've been talking about, like landscaping, cleaning, and various things like that, are service contracts. Service contracts are typically 5 years.
Oh, wow.
In addition to that, as long as you do a good job, guess what they do 3 more times?
They automatically extend it.
They can renew. Exactly. So as I tell someone, you get a $50,000 contract per year from an agency. And you do it for 5 years as a service contract, and you renew it 3 times. That's 20 times 50,000.
Right.
Okay.
I can't do that math.
So,
that's a lot of zeros, though.
that's actually, and actually, I don't know. I can do some math. My partner
I
likes.
think that's $1 million, isn't it? $1 million?
That's $1 million. Good math. Good math. That's $1 million over 20 years. And then I tell them, how would you like to have another 5 to 10 contracts?
Right. Because you did good on that, and they either had other business, other entities, or their friend, their other people,
locations, whatever the case may be. And if you, and here's another one, let's say on January 1st of the new year, any year, okay, you knew that you already had 10 or 15 contracts in place with the federal government. They pay on time. Okay. Generally, we talked about there could be.
Yeah, they're getting better at it.
Yeah, but it usually is something we do that causes them not to pay on time.
Right.
Small business. But let's say on January 1st, you get 10 or 15 of those contracts. All right. Would that help the stability of your business if you knew, as long as I do the work, I don't have to go out and chase it. It's there. All I got to do is do the work. And I got $1 million coming in from each one of these 10, 15, 20, what we like to call giant clients. Good way to build your business, build them with big clients that'll stay with you for a long time. So as I tell our business, let me ask you, if you're thinking of buying new equipment, let's say you're in construction, if you're thinking of buying a warehouse space, if you're thinking of expanding in another way, hiring more people, do you feel more comfortable doing it?
Right.
If you know you have federal contracts in place, or just chasing business the way that, what I like to call, what actually, researchers have called the snail trail, I like to call the hamster in the wheel.
Right.
Okay? Because a hamster, because the only reason I don't like snail trail, I understand what it means. You're not moving very fast, but the hamster in the wheel doesn't moves quickly.
Right.
The small
the snail at least moves, but the poor hamster is just there.
But he's moving, he's working hard, but he's not getting any place.
Right.
He's not making any progress. And that's the way I think a lot of small businesses feel. They feel like the hamster in the wheel.
Right.
I'm putting in 60, 70 hours a week. I can't get ahead. I'm making less money. My profits are cut. Is there a solution for this?
Right.
And I think the solution can be, for an awful lot of people, not everyone, it's not a fit for everyone, but for an awful lot of businesses, I think the solution is federal contracts.
Right.
There's a lot of money available, like we talked about before. 75% of the revenue, 93% of the contracts set aside for small businesses are not going to them. It's there. It's there. It could help a lot of businesses.
Now, Ron, we've only got a couple minutes left. And I'm sure that we have people who went, ooh, that sounds good, but it still sounds really complicated. So tell us, you've been mentioning your masterclass and things like that. So tell us how you can work with people to help them through this process.
We have a masterclass. Let's say as of right now, you go, okay, I'd like to learn more. That's all we try to do is, okay, if you want to learn more, go to this step, go to this step. Okay. Our first step is to come to one of our master classes.
Okay. And they're virtual, I'm assuming.
They are virtual. Yeah. They're virtual. They last about 2 hours.
Okay.
We're going to give you all the ins, outs. We like to say the good, the bad, and the ugly. My partner and I are both old enough to remember that Clint Eastwood movie. Okay. So the good, the bad, and the ugly of federal contracts. We'll tell you about the opportunity. We'll tell you about some of the stats that you and I have gone through. We'll tell you about, some of the keys. We mentioned giant clients a second ago. We go over that whole concept, which is a very big concept in study of businesses and why they fail and why they succeed. And then at the end, we talk about our program. Our next step is to have folks come to an orientation workshop. Okay. That orientation workshop is 3 hours where we lay out all 7 steps of our program for folks. Okay. Now, at the end of that, they can decide, okay, I want to try this on my own. If they do, we'll do the registration for them. We'll do their SAM, which is the toughest one to do.
Right.
That's the toughest one to do. We'll do their SAM. We'll do it perfectly. They'll get a cage cooked over. And if they want to do it on their own at that point, they can go do it on their own. But if they say to me, Ron, I can't do this on my own. I need your help. I like the fact that you have private conferences. I like the fact that you can find the buyers, the end users, that you have a system, a 52-week follow-up system that you give us access to with all the templates and scripts and everything else. You find the best agencies for me. You train me in sales. You have a mastermind group every week that meets. Hey, I'd like to try that. Then we do have obviously that offering as well. And we have different kinds of offerings for different kinds of business.
Right.
In fact, I'm going to give you a little teaser since I've had such a good time today, and I really appreciate you asking me on. My partner Chip, who I've mentioned to you as well, I mentioned to him this morning I would love to have him come on maybe in a month or two.
Right. Kind of do a follow-up.
And the follow-up though is going to focus on another aspect of our program that's actually even for big businesses. And the reason I say that is that, remember I mentioned the 50 million? If a business is over 50 million, they can't get no big contracts. But they can partner in certain ways with small businesses and get those contracts. Because if you think about it, you mentioned it before, if you're a 50 million or $100 million company and you're competing with a $10 billion company on a federal contract, who's most likely going to get that contract?
Right. It's going to be the big guy.
Company. Yes. So those people are really in a tough situation because they can't get the no bid contract.
Right. They're kind of in that no man's land.
They're in that no man's land. However, there's 3 specific ways that my partner, it's in one of our programs now. So I'm giving you the teaser. I think that's what they call this, right?
Yeah.
I'm giving you the teaser for Chip to come on in whenever he comes on, in a month or 3 weeks or 2 months or whatever. So, so anyway, so that's another way that even big businesses can even partner with small business.
Well, and it's important for small businesses to know that there's big businesses that are looking for you.
Well, and the cool thing about that is, remember you mentioned a little while ago about what if I'm a small company, I get access to $100,000 or $200,000 contract. I can't handle that. Maybe you set up a partnership.
Right.
You can team, and there are other ways as well with a bigger company. It doesn't just have to be another small company. It could even be a bigger company, because there are ways you can do that. And then plus, let's say that other bigger company's got a little bit of federal experience. If it does, you even are tied to them. So when they're looking at, let's say you bid on a contract at some point, you're over 300,000. You bid on a contract then. Well, if you've got the experience of the bigger company,
right,
and
you're on their coattails.
You can ride on their coattails and get a contract like that. So, if you know the game, you can do. I mean, we've had clients, that have made literally millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
So,
well, how do they contact you and find out about the masterclass and things like that?
Well, there's three ways. I can be contacted. I've got two different emails. One is Ron at, Fed Profits, FED Profits with an S on the end.com. They can contact me there. They can contact me at another for our second company, info at supercharge, no D, profits with an S, info at superchargeprofits.com. Our website, as you mentioned, which there are several places on there. You can request information, set up an appointment. You can even go ahead and get into one of our master classes. You'll see the page to schedule that.
Okay.
So there's a number of different ways like that to check us out. You can look me up if you see my name, Imbach. Believe me, there aren't many Imbachs on LinkedIn. In fact, I think there's only one other one. And since I am not a cattle rancher in Central California, I can tell you that for sure. I'm the only Ron that I know of. There could be one in Switzerland, I found out. But I'm not in Switzerland. And I'm not a cattle rancher in Central California. So I'm easy to find on LinkedIn. Connect with me on there.
Perfect.
Ask me a question. Set up an appointment. I can send my calendar link if someone wants to have a short chat before the masterclass. Be glad to do it.
Great. I love it. I love it. Well, do you have any final thoughts that you want to leave everyone with?
Just my final thoughts are, don't kind of with the point you said. If you're a small business and you've already written off the federal government long ago, you won't even consider. I mentioned show up properly. A lot of businesses never get contracts as they never show up at all.
Right.
Not just not show up properly, never show up at all. So
you got to try.
Give it another look. Come to one of our master classes. If you come to one of our master classes, we lay it all out for you. And at the end of it, you say, Ron, I didn't like it before. I still don't like it. I'll refund the money you paid for the master class. Okay. So no problem. But you're going to get valuable information that you could use, even try it on your own. But it is complicated because it is the government. It is going to be a little complicated. It's kind of like you need to know the rules of the road. You need to know the rules of the game. But we know the rules of the game and we can help you out like that. So just don't write it off. Give it another thought. And who knows, it could be something that could really help to build the money's there.
Cool.
The business is there. So
I love it. I love it. Well, I have been having an absolutely fascinating discussion. And I can't wait to do this again and to get into this more. But I'm Deb Creer. I've been talking with Ron Imbach. And until next time, everyone have a great day.
Tune in for our next program for even more trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. The Business Power Hour, hosted by Deb Creer, is proud to be part of the C-Suite Network.